probably going to turn most of this over to Matt to get us started, but one of the things I want to mention, you can see on our agenda there all the different pieces, right? The board goals, mission and vision, and Iowa school leader standards, which leads to like a superintendent evaluation and superintendent goals and things like that. And I joined kind of last second yesterday a meeting with ISB folks. We're facilitating a meeting for school board presidents to kind of go over the new standards, and they talked about the evaluation process and making sure you have that set up with kind of time points throughout the year. And one of the things that they brought up multiple times is making sure that your district goals and your superintendent goals and your board goals and all that stuff is going aligned and going in the same direction. And so I thought that was very fortuitous that we were having this discussion today. So I think as we start going through the agenda, you're going to see some blurring of all the different pieces on it as we talk about one thing, which will carry over into another. So we might not just go 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll probably sort of mix it up as we go. But they did have some lovely forms that we could use when we get to that point for like evaluation or setting up goals. And just some other advice that I'll throw in as the conversation goes along. With that, I guess we will start at the top with our mission and vision talk. I'll let Matt kind of lead us off there.
Sure. Well, good morning again, everybody. I just first probably just want to express my thanks for being here on a Saturday in the middle of the fall with all the other things going on. And, I just think that's when I think about you guys and the service and sacrifice you make to commit this amount of time and energy to do this work and to serve our kids here in Iowa City, it's really profound and it means a lot. I think there's a lot of different work ahead for us, but at the same time, I've been really proud of our ability to work together through really difficult times with the pandemic and social unrest and all those other pieces, and to keep our I think kind of eye on the prize, if you will, and know what our direction and our focus is. And so I think as we approach some of this conversation around goal work this morning, the thing I feel really good about is I all think we kind of have a general idea of like we know what we want to do, right? And then it's about how do we articulate that, right? And help give ourselves some solid direction and articulate those plans to the rest of the organization throughout, that we are all aligned around the same things. Because I do think from our conversations and the work that we all identify as important, we're really there, in mindset and kind of value and disposition standpoint. And then it's a matter of just how do we articulate that into goals and action steps and some of those things. So, but most importantly, thanks for being here on a Saturday with a lot of other stuff going on. We had a great football game, inter-city game last night at City High. It was a great atmosphere. Wasn't much of a game. It was pretty lopsided last night, but it was still fun.
Depends on what side of the field
you're
on.
Exactly. Depends on what side of town you live on, I guess. But it was a neat experience, and I think a good event all around. We had a lot of leadership team members there supervising and helping out, so it was fun to connect with all them. But so I shared just a Google Doc with you guys that will be displayed up here, and you might have to remind me to get up and move it down if I don't do that, if that's helpful. But you can all open it there on your laptop too. There's some different lift-off links to our different plans that are online, and then when we get down to those leadership standards like Sean talked about, I have a link that lifts off there to the School Administrators of Iowa website as well that kind of talks about those new leadership standards, and so we'll kind of wrap towards that. But like Sean said, I think a lot of these things are intertwined. So the first one I just listed there for conversation, I guess, is around the vision and mission. And when we look at those for us, I'm not sure the last time that was touched. Maybe Kim's going to have the best history on that. But as we talk about our goals, the board goals, and then getting into strategic plans, CSIP, equity plan, portrait of graduate facility plan, this is really what drives those and creates kind of that mindset and approach to our work. And so I guess I just put it on here to see if we're solid on what's stated there, if we think we need to dig into any of that and do some larger vision and mission work. And I don't think that probably just happens here, right? At this table, that's okay, if we identify that as an area we want to either do some refinement of or create a new one, then we'll need to kind of talk about what's the plan to do that and what are your guys' expectations for how that looks and how we get the input around that. So we have this child-centered future focus that we see, and then I put the mission statement in there as well. And so for me, a quick take on that, there's probably some things in that mission statement that as we get into board goals and all those other plans, that we would want to make sure that mission statement encompasses and includes. And so that's probably an evaluative measure. You could say, do you think that speaks to, the other things we're trying to do there? And if it does, maybe there's not a lot of reason to go back and do anything there and to really kind of refine it or scrap it and develop a new one, whatever you kind of see fit there. And then the letter C, before I kind of just open it up to conversation and feedback around this part, would be just, we kind of joked about Lisa wore her awesome t-shirt at the last meeting, but as we approach our work, I think as a leadership team, this is something we talk a lot about, right? And we threw it on that t-shirt that we gave all the new teachers this year from support of the foundation, and then had some other ones we handed out the first couple days. But it's this idea, one district, one mission, and this all in for all kids. I think that's the approach to the work, and I think that is articulated in a lot of our goals and a lot of our plans as we go throughout here. But this idea of all in for all, and all means all, and it really has to be anything we're doing, we have to consider how it's going to be accessible for all, impact all, achievable for all of those concepts. So with that, kind of where you guys at on vision, mission, and what you think we have, and any work that might need to be done around that, or if we should just keep moving forward with the way it's stated.
I know a couple of years ago, we had someone from ISAB came down and did sort of like the board sort of retreat to help us understand what some of our priorities were as a district. I thought it was really good. We got some feedback and then turned it over to administration to help us sort of draft a new mission statement, because at the time, a lot of us were saying we think we need to review that and make sure it's exactly where we are as a district and where we want to head. I kind of like that work because I thought a lot of good discussion and a good sort of groundwork was laid. We just never got to the point of getting a document from administration with those key points. So I don't know if that's something that we would look at doing to help us organize all of our thoughts, because it was Harry. The guy's name was Harry,
right.
And he does a lot of this work in working with boards, develop their mission and vision statement. And he gave us like great feedback that it's important that you find like no more than three priorities, because he felt like this one was all over the place.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. It was like, this is
Yeah.
a lot of words.
Yeah.
And
What does it mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would like to maybe have that conversation. Is that something we want to look at doing, or what?
Do you think we could try that this morning? Is that what you're saying, Christina? Or-
What's that? I'm sorry.
All right. Should we try that this morning? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's helpful to have someone moderate
Okay.
the discussion that's sort of not tied
Sure,
to
right.
the organization, because he was very honest, because he didn't have any skin in the game. He's an outsider looking in, and for me that was very helpful, instead of all of us who sort of, we have a working relationship, and sometimes that may not create the space to be as honest as we need to be with each other. So I appreciated having someone from the outside come in and really push us on some of our thoughts.
Okay.
So you think you having him come back?
Harry just retired.
Oh, there we go, here.
Oh, sure.
A week ago.
Oh, man.
Like a week ago.
He was good.
He was
But
really
they have
good.
some new folks. Their newest hire at ISB is actually finishing her 15th year on the school board, and like 8 years as a board president there. I think in Muscatine.
Okay.
She's joined ISB. I don't know if she's going to pick up the slack there, but there's a few people there that could do that kind of work. I had mentioned to Matt earlier, I thought, we did go out and ask a whole lot of people what our future state looks like, right? We did a portrait of the graduate, we sought a lot of input, and we have some key words from that, right? I didn't know if that type of language should just be in the mission, right? If that's our goal, is to what we see our graduates look like, how do we put that in there?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think even having someone from sort of outside help us.
Frame.
Yeah, because for me, I just think it's, I mean, even in my professional life, it's really hard for us to tackle sometimes these things when you sit in it all the time. But having someone from the outside sort of push you and ask hard questions that sometimes we don't ask ourselves.
Sure. That, I mean, that sounds worthwhile to me, so. Not maybe say in order that there's, another thing for me to do, but perhaps we can do it without too much, asking you to do too much else.
Now, I will warn though, I think that meeting was something like 3.5 hours. And it wasn't on one of our board days. So it was like another retreat and it was just dedicated to that.
Just
So,
the mission statement?
oh yeah, it was a meeting.
And I think we were starting from scratch, right?
Yeah.
Like really looking at a long-term vision that hadn't been done in a long time, and we've done that.
Okay.
We've done some of the work to do that.
And
So
the
I think we have a much
portrait.
better baseline.
Yeah.
Yeah, the portrait was really helpful. 'cause
That's what, yeah.
There's a lot of input.
That's what I was gonna say. I'm not sure how many new inputs we would need into it, right? I mean, like when you go down here, or when you scroll down and you look at what we've outlined for these goals that we're gonna get into here in a little bit, you talk about those things, or like Sean referenced in the portrait, like I think the inputs are there, right? It's probably just making sure that with all these inputs we considered, like Ruthina said, getting somebody that can kind of put a fresh set of eyes on it to say, okay, well, this is what you guys are kind of saying, from what I see from your determined goals and actions that you want to take, this is really what you are expressing the mission to be. And these have all been influenced by our stakeholders, right? It's not like we developed any of these things in isolation. FNP 2.0, Portrait of Graduate, our Comprehensive Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Plan, the original strategic plan, all of these things have been influenced by our community and our stakeholders. So it's not just the superintendents, it's not just the boards, it's not just any one individual's plan. It's really been taking all those inputs we received and then how do we make sure that statement's really reflective of our work. So I'm happy to get in contact with somebody from like a facilitator standpoint, and then I do think, like you guys are talking about, that looks a little bit different when they come this time as far as considering, okay, Harry or whoever it is, I don't know if Harry's still wanting to do side work or not, maybe he would still come do something like that, or we work with another individual and say, okay, here's our stuff, how do you help us craft, a mission statement around these things?
Yeah, and even somebody, we could send it all ahead of time, maybe they could come with something just to get us started.
Mm-hmm. I'll clean up the notes later, some.
Yeah, no, you're
I think
fine.
one of the things that I draw a lot on, my work experience, right? We get audited, right? All sorts of different places come and audit. One of the things that they tell you to expect is an auditor can walk into your lab and say, "What's your mission statement?" And they expect you to be able to say it in your own words, not so much just regurgitating it. And if your mission is super lengthy and has all these pieces in it, and you're expected to say, when somebody asks you what's your mission, and you're like, well, we got some of this and that, and you're kind of all over the place, you probably don't have a real focused vision, right, or mission. So I think the number of words is important, but the intent behind it is really what you're looking for. And if it's just piecemeal in a whole bunch of different areas, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it has to be pretty streamlined, not just in the words themselves, but the intent behind it.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Our mission statement we need to look at as our elevator pitch for what the district stands for, and it needs to be communicated in 15, as from riding the elevator from one floor to the next.
Yeah.
That's the amount of time you have when people want to know what is it that you guys stand for, do, or look to the future. And right now, I don't think we have that.
No.
Yeah, and that would be I would identify that as a challenge for us that I would guess that most of our staff aren't familiar with the mission statement, and I don't think that's necessarily abnormal in large organizations, but it shouldn't be the norm, right? I mean, if we're a high functioning, school district organization, we should all be in touch with that and know what our core is, right? And I always think that's what your vision mission really does, is it speaks to what is your core, what's your core purpose, here. And if we could quickly identify that, like Ruthina's talking about an elevator speech, or Sean said, in your own words, then I think people are always in touch with that purpose component, right? Like, what am I doing here? Why do we show up and do this? What's our purpose? What's our drive?
I mean, we're gonna have dozens, right, of different programs and tactics and goals and everything else, right? So you don't have to cram all of that into your mission statement, right? I think that's where we get stuck. It's like, but we also think this, and we also think that, well, yeah.
And that's what this feels like. This mission statement feels like they were trying to.
Everything we thought of in it.
Let's just throw it in there.
It doesn't mean you don't do things.
So could we do this by the end of October?
Ooh.
Well,
No.
I mean, we could, but that doesn't mean we should.
Yeah. I mean, given that, honestly.
I mean, I think, should we wait till the election?
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say, we're 38 days from
Yeah.
having
Right.
potentially 4 new people at the
Right,
table.
okay. All
But
right.
they don't come on, doesn't the term not
It'll be
end
the
until
end of-
End
December?
of November.
See the second board meeting in November.
Okay,
I mean,
Yeah.
I think we could maybe start, depending on how the schedule works out, maybe start it, but not finalize it. I don't know.
I think
I'm
we
just
reach
throwing it
out
out there.
to ISD or somebody that can
Something
facilitate and get it on the calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think you may struggle with them being available,
Yeah.
and even if we plan it for later in November or early December, I think that's fine. I think we want to get it on the calendar. That was one of the other things that they mentioned yesterday in that webinar was put the stuff on your calendar, right? Like pick dates out and get it on there, and then, it holds you all accountable to meeting those deadlines, so.
So it sounds more like first part of December or by the middle of December.
yeah, I mean, I think that maybe, you'd want to have a new mission statement by the beginning of the school year next year and have not that you have to take that long to get it done, but that seems like a good place to start, just to be.
It doesn't stall out the rest of the stuff that's on our agenda either, right? I mean, we can come up with
Right, right.
stuff to put on our plan.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's just like, man, once they get that mission statement, then that's when
Then it's- Then the flywheel is going to start turning, right? Yeah. Okay, so kind of what I have as action steps then are, we'll make contact with trying to get a facilitator to help us with this conversation. We'll wait kind of post-election time period. I think that's an important step and I think that'll be just a nice onboarding piece with our new board members, that we're all coalesced around the same vision, mission. We have that same purpose and commitment piece. And we'll look at trying to kick off that initial conversation, that December, January, that turn of the calendar year time frame, and really that this is complete by end of, we'll say, 21-22 school year, so that we have it for the next school year, right? Okay. All right, so Ruthina stepped out for a minute, and I can repeat this quickly, but the next piece on here is really around board goals, strategic plan. I'm just going to scroll down so you can see the whole list of things. And and it goes kind of wraps onto 2 pages. But so what I've listed out here is you see board goals, and then under the board goals I have the strategic plan, our comprehensive school improvement plans, comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, our equity action steps I just tabbed in under there because that's kind of been our focus of that work. And then Portrait of the Graduate, FMP 2.0, and then those last 3 I'll kind of take secondary here. But I guess the straight feedback I guess I would just want to try to provide is this is a little clunky and all over the place, right? So we have all of these different things that seem like mini strategic plans, right? And I think the real rub then becomes between the board goals, and if you open, that tab and see those board goals, and then the strategic plan having those 3 big goals. I think my general sense would be, maybe a healthier model would be if those board goals were really the strategic plan, right? I mean, like that should be what drives the work of the organization in some sense. And so when we have all these different goal statements in all these different areas, that's what makes it challenging to articulate. Now, if you guys said, no, Matt, we really still need to have identified board goals, well, then it would be how do all of those plans under there feed up to the board goals? And we can live with whatever, of course, but the sense would be, I would think, okay, my own goal or my own idea around this would be, can you create a strategic plan that essentially has 4 or 5 goal statements that really are reflective then of each of these plans? So if your strategic plan had still the reading and math goal, your CSIP would be your plan for that. Your 3rd goal around equity would be your comprehensive diversity, equity, inclusion plan. But you'd probably have to go a little further now and say, okay, well, we're going to make it a true strategic plan and also have a 4th goal around facilities or operations. Maybe that's then FMP 2.0. That's our plan there, right? So can you have a comprehensive strategic plan? Because right now our strategic plan is pretty instructional based, right? And that's what the mission of our organization is, but we know we have other goals, right? So our strategic plan has to be, or probably should be, more comprehensive in that fashion to account for those other goal areas we do. And we know that, even operationally, some of the work in our equity plan talks about that, about hiring and recruiting and retaining diverse staff members, right? And so that's an important goal for us. So I don't know if that's making sense with how I'm trying to describe that, but right now it's a little bit fuzzy on, I would think with people who come in and kind of assess organization, they'd say it's a little bit fuzzy about, well, what trumps what? Like, are the board goals really what you guys are after, or are you really after these strategic plan goals over here? And so in some way, I almost feel like we need this umbrella, right? That this is the North Star, and then what are the plans under that North Star that help achieve those goals? So that would be my feedback. So I don't know if you guys want to go through those board goals. That's kind of what we've traditionally done here from my understanding, and what we did last summer. We'd work through those board goals, kind of give a status update or a quick conversation and do that. But I think my reason for bringing it here to you today is probably to look at that a little bit more holistically, to say, how do we organize ourselves in a better fashion?
Right, so I pulled up our board goals from last year, and I think part of the problem is I had to hunt back for it just to find it in like an email, right? So that's not great that we can't even find it. But the way we had it organized was we had focus areas, which probably aligned pretty well with the strategic plan, right? And then each focus area had 1 to, 5 or so board goals that went along with that focus area. And then as another subset was like specific actions that we were going to take to support that work, right?
Gotcha.
So I can see taking some of that same structure, but as a tree, aligning it a little differently, but it's still accomplishing the same things. Sort of that focus area being the strategic plan, and that's the goals that we are all having, right? I think that's a fair way to put it. And then you're going to have actions that the board would have to take to support them, and actions that you and your team would have to take to support it, right? And they all kind of feed together. I think the one piece that we've had in there is board goals in the past that I think we need to make sure we still account for is like our own like board development work. If we want to do trainings and things like that, we want to make sure that we still have the space to have that as a goal for the board, which is a little harder to kind of squeeze it into the strategic plan, although it kind of probably falls into some of the improvement plans, right? We're improving our group just like anything else, right? So that's where I want to try to make sure we've got stuff in there. But
Right. So were you thinking that instead of having, I'm just trying to understand what you said prior to Sean speaking. Are you trying to say that, okay, instead of having like the board focus goals, we could, for example, because we want it more elaborate, this academic achievement should be a strategic goal, and then there's more that goes into that. Is that what you're trying to imply?
Yeah, exactly, Jeremy. So like you see right there, I'm typing in the board goals right now, and I just put like academic achievement. Well, that should be accomplished through our comprehensive school improvement plans, right? Equity, climate, culture, that should be accomplished through our comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. Curriculum and instruction, again, through the CSIP. Facilities, that would be like a new goal that we would need to add to the strategic plan, but that could be written around facilities, and then that would be like a fourth goal, and that would be our FMP 2.0 work, right? That would be our accomplishments there. And then like the one that Sean mentioned would be, okay, well then just how do we account for that in a strategic plan around board governance and development, right? Like how do we articulate that through their strategic plan? And I think we could, I just think we would need to think about it some more, and maybe it's even, I think where Sean was going was saying, like under each of these, so say if you had a strategic plan with 5 goals, under each of these there's going to be leadership team items, there's going to be board items, there's going to be, you know, our teachers and our staff items that they're going to be responsible for, and so maybe you break it down that way, and that's where the board development and governance part comes in to accomplish those goals, right?
Yep, that's what I see too, that it's a step we're taking to meet each goal is board development.
Yeah, that's how you ensure the alignment, right? Like everybody has a piece to the bigger puzzle.
I guess the only piece I was nervous about bringing it up is with you guys is I don't want you to feel like Matt's saying we can't have goals, right? Because I don't think that's the idea. But when I look at what your goals are, they're the goals we have in those other areas, right? And so I just think it's a matter of articulating it out, right? And that those, and I also think it gives us a little bit of protection to stay anchored to it's like keeping the important thing, right? It's like, okay, well, this is what we've said is the important stuff, and this is what we want to keep our focus on, so that when other issues start to come up, we have to weigh their importance against the things we've said are the most important for us to work on and accomplish. And eventually something else is going to come to the forefront, right? We are going to probably have to have some special attention and focus on it. But
I think the important thing, I don't know how we put it into the plan itself, is sort of timelines as to when we're going to try and meet goals, but how often we're going to be reviewing things. Because obviously the last year and a half has been predominantly like the public talk, right? That we're sitting up there, we're talking about, are we wearing masks? Are we online? Are we quarantining? Like that's been the very public talk. But a lot of the work around some of these other things is still happening, right? We're getting our equity update monthly, so work was still being done, and the board was still doing things, but it wasn't really part of the conversation, right? So I think we need to make sure that we have it out there, that we're coming back to this on a more frequent basis, regardless of what the current situation in the world is. That we have to be very intentional about coming back to the goals and the strategic plan, and making sure that we're still making strides.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Sean. So I feel very much the same thing.
and I think that kind of goes down to, type it in there, I'll come back to that thought. Can't see when I scroll on my own screen. Is this piece of those action steps, I think it comes back to this piece, right? This letter F, these accountability structures. And like when we talk about accountability structures, the way I really think about it is what's holding us accountable to the work. Like an example of an accountability structure we brought in last year was those monthly updates around our equity action steps, right? We put that structure in, it was going to be a monthly report out, it kind of held us all accountable to making sure that work was proceeding and that we were continuing to go ahead with it. So when we identify our goals up here, and I just started to kind of write down what I was trying to say out loud here, is then, okay, well, what are those action steps in there? And that's the accountability piece, right? Okay, so what's the board accountable to? What's the leadership team accountable to? What's the staff accountable to? all of those components, and then that's what we revisit, right? And then that's what we say is our conversation and saying, are we accomplishing these things to achieve the goals that we've set out for ourselves? So I think, like you basically transitioned just to that point, right? And we just need to make sure we have accountability structures built into that strategic plan to make sure the work's actually happening, so it doesn't live over here on a page and we never come back to it.
So it looks, one of the things I'm struggling with is like, it's just too much, right? I think other people have said that. And it's not well organized and streamlined. And I like things like very linear and like boom, boom, boom. And like, I live this, right, on the board. So like, God knows what a member of the public thinks of this, right? It's not accessible. But what I'm seeing you do, Matt, is under strategic plan, right? You're cleaning it up, right? CSIPs is now like, now we can get rid of B because CSIP is under goal 1. And comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, we can get rid of that because now that's under, do we need different board goals separate from the strategic, like, can we just house everything under strategic plan? Because I feel like my goal is to execute the strategic plan.
Yeah.
I think that the action steps that the board leadership and the team
Yeah.
are gonna, like, those become our goals, whatever those action steps are. Our goal is to complete the actions, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, and like maybe we have one unique thing that we have to do, which is the superintendent evaluation.
And board development.
Yeah, right? And board, but even board development, I think, fits because I'm sure somewhere in here, right, we have professional development for
True.
teachers and staff and
Yeah.
admin, and that just include, we just house board in that
Yeah.
part. Like, everybody has to have professional development. So then we get rid of then we just have a strategic plan, and that's how we move forward. It's just strategic plan, and we have the goals under that, and then everything else there is going to go away. And it's not going to go away, right? It's going to get housed under
Our strategic.
the strategic plan. So then we can, and however many goals we end up with, and we can't have 20, that's too many, but like 5, 6, 7, and then that's what we can show to the community and ourselves and the rest of the district. Here are the very clear goals. And now everything that we do then is going to pin back to goal 3 or goal 6, or like this is why we're doing it, because it relates to this goal. And then we do away with everything else.
He would say 3.
3. I love 3.
And he's like hard on that. But, because to me, when you put portrait up there, to me that's the,
Well, I don't
that's
think
that umbrella.
portrait's a goal. I
No, I think
feel
it's
portrait
the-
was, I feel portrait gave us information and data as to what our plan should look like, right? We've got those 6 attributes, like that's
To me,
pushing
that's
what it
more
looks
like a
like.
mission statement even, is
Yeah.
that overarching thing. And then to achieve these statements or these ideas, then we're gonna have goals which should have, and if we're having goals, they should be like SMART goals, right? Like they should have a time associated with them and a way to measure that. That it's some sort of reasonable thing that you can accomplish. And then underneath that are, okay, then here's the specific things we're gonna do to meet each. And if we limit it, and I mean even those 4, or if you even wanna take reading and math could be even one goal, and there could be something like instruction or
Teaching and learning.
a broader topic, and then underneath that, because we know that reading and math are, we have real specific targets, that would be the action. And the action could be, we're gonna close an achievement gap, or, whatever specific.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if you guys are saying the same thing I'm thinking, but if our goals are the same as the strategic goals or strategic plan, as it aligns with that, then why do we have a separate board goal?
Yep, that's exactly what.
That's what I
said.
think. I think we should get rid of board
And
goals.
math.
Because I was like, okay, I looked at the board goals and
Yeah.
I was like, we're basically saying the same thing in the strategic plan.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't, anyway, why won't we have something little in the strategic plan to say that it aligns with the board goals, right? And then leave that, because it's the plan for the district and it's something that the board agrees to. So we shouldn't have a separate, unless that's just for us to look at. Like,
I think the board goal, we have one, execute the strategic plan. Like and if that's what we agree on, like, and then the rest of the things that we want to do are all fall under the strategic plan. I don't want to leave anything out though, and so I want to make sure, but to me, it's execute the strategic plan. That's our goal. And if that's our goal, we don't need a document that says board goals, right? Like, we just are like, go
So,
away.
yeah, that was exactly what
Yeah.
everybody was saying, just different
Yeah.
words.
You nailed it, right? Because
Yeah.
if we have this one page over here that says board goals, and we have this one page over here that says superintendent goals, right? And we have this other strategic plan or district-wide
Yeah.
goals,
Then why
you open up the
not
opportunity to be in direct conflict
Yes.
with each other, right? Like, that's not how we're gonna
And-
accomplish anything.
And unless they say the exact same thing, there is going to be room to interpret them as at odds with each
Yeah.
other. And I don't think that's good leadership on our part.
And I think the nice thing,
Right,
Sorry.
yeah.
yeah, I think you summed it up well, Dromy, and I think that the nice thing about it is we've done so much intense work in some of these areas that we really have actionable plans around a lot of these areas already. And I think that's a good sign of just, again, health of organization, that those board goals have come into alignment with where the strategic plan goals are, the teach and learning goals are, the facility goals are. And so I'm happy to take a crack at drafting something. And then, I think, again, if I kind of think about action steps here, it would be to kind of draft a document that would encompass this conversation, bring it to you guys for review, get feedback, see if this is speaking to, the nature of the conversation we have. It would link off probably to our plans, like I said, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan, FMP, CSIPs, and articulate those things through so that, basically we would have I was just clicking on our old strategic plan, that would just look different, right? We'd start to reshape that a little bit.
And there should be action steps for all of us, for all of the goals.
Yep.
Like, there absolutely should be. And as far as like the board action steps, which I feel is replacing the term board goal, is, board action step. And it could be as simple as make decision X by Y, right? For like facilities, make these decisions on, are we gonna have a new elementary school, or are we gonna do preschool centers, like big decision type things to support whatever goal is in there, right? Like, that's how we will move forward and get things done, is to have an action result, right? We just have the goals that are like, support doing this, right?
Goals have to have a plan. Otherwise, that's not a goal. That's just blah, blah, blah.
And I think Sean hit, said something key that we have to keep in mind, the big decision items. It's not our job to get into the weeds of the day-to-day running of the district. That's just not what boards are there for. We're there to look more globally, to make sure we're setting up goals and action steps and deadlines for everything for Matt to then direct his team to carry on the day-to-day action of how that unfolds.
I also wonder, and this is just really kind of nitpicky, well, not nitpicky, but we've got operations as a goal. I'm not sure operations is a goal, because operations is going to be how we meet goals, right? So if a goal is preschool or whatever, it's going to be that F&P that then executes that. But so in terms of streamlining and making this as pared down as possible, to me, operations seems like the way that we reach the goal, but it's not its own goal in and of itself. Yeah, it's the action part. Like, Jeff is going to operations committee the heck out of whatever we tell, set the.
Jeff will operationally develop playgrounds, and I think that gets back to what I just said.
But we have to
It's
tell
not the
him,
day-to-day running of the district that's what our, setting the deadlines that Sean talked about. It's the big picture that then trickles down to Matt and his staff for the daily operations of whatever operations they're focusing in on.
Right. So if the goal in the Comprehensive Diversity Equity Plan is a measure of equity, a goal is inclusive playgrounds, and we decide that.
Yes.
And then operations decides how do we actually have inclusive
Yes.
playgrounds. so that we can meet this goal of diversity, equity,
Yeah.
and inclusion.
Yep.
As you're doing this plan, I know it's helpful for me, like, the visual, like,
Yep.
you know, what does it look, you know, if it's an umbrella or whatever it is, to show us that, you know, just
Right.
for those visual learners.
That's the part I like about the other one, right, is that there is a visual aspect of it, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's what we have to have, and then I think that speaks to all your stakeholders too, right? And that's a quick, okay, what are these guys trying to do, right? Well, here's your kind of plan on a page that speaks to that. And of course, we're gonna have lift off to more specific information in each of those. The one thing with coming back to that fourth goal, the reason I put it on there is because of how big FMP 2.0 is, and as you get to those different like key decision points that need to be made, I don't know if it's writing a goal around operations or if it's just writing the goal about achieving FMP 2.0 or something to that effect to make sure that that's accounted for in there to say there's probably timelines and decisions we're gonna have to make there that will inform what we're able to do in goals 1 through 3, right? So I'll figure out a way to represent it, and then if I bring it back and you guys don't like it, you want me to shift again, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, it is key. I mean, I think it's important to remember, like, before FMP 1.0, there was no FMP.
Yep.
Like, there was no plan because nobody's paying attention to it, and we just went about our day, and all of a sudden, we better build a new school somewhere, and we did, and, you know, so to make sure we say, yeah, we need to focus on facilities, because that is a big board, you know, hey, we need to think 30 years out. We're gonna buy land or whatever, just to, however that's on the radar, yeah.
Yeah, there will be a lot of action steps associated with that specific goal, right?
Right.
When it gets into some other things that I think have been board goals in the past, you know, when you look at, well, like the, you know, our climate action, you know, initiative around that, right? Like, well, that would be easy, you know, then we could, well, are we just identifying a goal there? Well, not really, just specifically around that, because that's really embedded into how we consider FMP 2.0 work, right? And so that conversation then would happen through that goal area so that it's articulated there, so.
Looking at, like goal 1, equity, like, I think we all understand that, right? And that, so everything we do, and we've been doing this, I feel really well for the, you know, past 12 months, is we look through everything with an equity lens. And is this, and so to me, that's a great goal for strategic plan equity. And then JP, I like what you said with reading and math instead of 1 and 2, like closing achievement gap or something like that, like boom, strategic plan, close that gap. Get everybody, you know, up, not so far apart, really work on teaching and learning and development, and there's a lot of stuff that falls on, and how do we do that? And there's a lot of nuts and bolts. And we can have them as 2 different goals, or we could combine them, and then we have room for one more third goal to fit under Harry's 3 goal. And then, like, what's that? You know, what do we want to be? You know, whole child. Like, is that that's the third strategic plan? Is we are focused on developing the whole child. And so, what'd you say?
I'm just saying, the portrait of a graduate will come. Like,
yeah, right? And then we pull it up there. But the whole child, that's our extracurriculars, our co-curriculars, our before and
preparing
after,
for when they leave us.
our career tech, like, so that, like, you are a whole developed human. Like, personally, that's one of the things I want to do as a school board member, is make sure that we're developing these students as whole-rounded people who are going to contribute to society when they leave our schools in a really positive way.
By the way, that's in the mission statement we don't like.
But see, if we put it as a goal, then we can get it out of the mission statement. Jeremy, you're the only one that knows the mission statement. That's amazing. But like that, to me, then I feel like with that we kind of hit all of the points. I mean, maybe we're leaving, you know, we always have to make sure we're not leaving something out. But those 3 goals really kind of seem to capture everything, and then we'll umbrella under that. And so then when we consider FMP 2.0 and what project we want to do, it's like, does it hit equity? Is it helping to close the achievement gap? And is it helping create address the whole child? If so, great. This helps our strategic plan. Let's move forward.
I think that splits out the administrative team fairly well, right, into those various areas. All the folks that are in this building, right, kind of fit into one of those more than others. I mean, there's always going to be some crossover, but I think that does a good job of saying, all right, so here might be some very specific tasks for, you know, our curriculum folks, and here's some very specific tasks for, like Kate and those folks.
Yeah.
So then does pandemic mitigation, does that become an action step under a goal of preparing the whole child or?
And closing the achievement gap.
Well,
You know?
Yeah, because action steps can be repeated
Yep.
throughout the
And goals,
different.
right, yeah, but I'm
sections.
just wondering where pandemic
Yeah.
mitigation fits in.
I sort of feel like that's just operational stuff that we have to do. I don't know that preparing for pandemic needs to be part of our strategic plan. Well, it's true, right? I mean, I think that's a valid concern, all right? Like, we're all gonna assume this is gonna be done and never happen again, and maybe it'll be another 100 years like it was this past time, but maybe it won't. But I don't know that our guiding principle is going to be, you know, pandemic mitigation. That's in
No, I'm
all
not
the things
thinking
that
of
we
it,
have to do.
I'm
but-
not thinking of it as something we have to do, we prepare for 10 years from now. But to me, it has to fit in someplace. This governance structure or planning structure.
To me, the biggest, one of the top 2 or 3 biggest problems with the pandemic is the disparate effect it's had on students and the loss of learning, right? And it's broadening that achievement gap. And so that's why I think it falls under closing the achievement gap, because
Okay. All right,
Or,
I can see that.
because even with that, because I'm thinking, even with that logic, pandemic mitigation, for me, health and safety, which then ties back to the whole child.
yep.
Yeah.
And I think our strongest ideas are going to hit 2 or ideally all 3 goals, right? I think that's going to help us guide to, this is a really good idea, because now we're ticking off 3 things.
Yeah.
You know, we're not just umbrella, and not all of them are going to hit all 3, but we'll say, no, this must be important
Right.
because it's touching on all of these parts of our strategic plan.
And also, when something like a pandemic happens or whatever, you know, your goals help you decide how you're going to approach that. And so our decision has been health and safety. You know, are we looking at this through an equity lens? You know, when we allowed special ed kids back in the building, right? And so I think that is what happened, right? Is our goal sort of drove the way Matt was making decisions about here's how we're going to deal with the pandemic. And I think that helps you when you know, if you were to come up against a big anti-mask public outcry. I mean, if you have your center, you know what your goals are. You're like, you know, this is why we're making these decisions, and you've articulated that. And I think it just helps you in that decision-making process to be like, you know, this is, even when this terrible thing happens, we're steady because we know our why of what we're doing, and we've articulated it. And I think we've been doing that. This, to me, today, this exercise feels a lot more like refining the message and the way we talk about it, rather than, because I think we've been doing it. You know, I think Matt and your team has been following these things, and we just need a way, because that's kind of one of my things when people say, oh, what about this? I'm like, well, here's what we're doing. It's hard for us to articulate, and one, it's just so much. It's so big
Right.
organization, lots going on. To be able to articulate this to the public in a one-page, really simple, boom.
Yeah.
So that easily digestible.
Charlie, when I hear you say that, I think about like our circumstances, right? And so our circumstances are going to change our action steps. Like our current reality, you know, is going to inform our action steps to take. Like when we know we're deficient in some of these areas, that's our current reality. So our action steps are going to be different rather than if we were achieving in a certain way we wanted to and we were trying to maintain, right? So right now, our current circumstances have to account for being in the pandemic. And so I think the way Lisa and JP were framing that, right, that our goals are still the same, but the steps we're going to have to take may be influenced by our current circumstances, and those current circumstances are being in the middle of a global pandemic, right? So that what we do around learning loss or what we do around health and safety and operations, all those things are going to be influenced through that. So I think that's a special thing to account for, but I'm not sure it shifts the goals. I think it shifts the action steps under the goals to account for that current reality.
We could have like a huge natural disaster, tornado rips
Oh,
through
yeah,
town, right? Goes through a lot of our elementary buildings and a high school. And I feel like this lens,
Yeah.
we're like, all right, So we know we gotta equity this and take care of our most vulnerable kids first, and like temporary learning, like we gotta pull the special ed kids out and make sure we've got them taken care of. Like, do you know what I mean? And like, we gotta deploy the hotspot program again for our kids that need internet. Like, I think that's the point is, it doesn't have to be pandemic specific, it's crisis management. Yeah.
Good.
But hopefully that won't happen. I just want to be clear, I don't want a natural disaster.
Yeah, let's not have another derecho.
Like, yes.
I mean, there was a derecho once, and boy, that messed up.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is that.
Once upon a time last year.
Okay.
So kind of action steps coming out of this one, I'm going to take a shot at kind of bringing you a draft plan, right? That then we'll kind of chew on a little bit and give some feedback to. You know, this is, I think this is exciting stuff, right? Like this is what informs our work in a really, I think, systemic way and gives us a lot of confidence in the work we're leading to say, you know, and I think it contributes to that whole like, and this culture, you know, a little bit of like, okay, well now you're asking me to do this and this and this thing and this thing, well, why, right? Like, okay, well if it's not articulated to one of these goals, then that gives us an honest reflection to say, is this something we should be doing right now, right? Or what's the most important thing to be doing right now? Where do we spend our time? So I think it's a really positive thing. I'll bring back, you know, a plan. How soon? I mean, like, for me, I think this is something we probably should. I know we talked about that vision mission one a little bit longer, but this one I think we should probably try to turn around, you know, something maybe a little sooner, right? So that we can keep working on this, because I think it's going to take a few iterations. So,
I agree with that.
You know, I think we're gonna be, I threw out there, you know, needing timelines for review and accountability and things like that, right? I think at the very least, we're gonna be looking at it quarterly, if not more often, so.
I like that
as
idea,
we-
Sean,
you know,
doing a
once we
quarter
get
should be
the
good.
mission and vision out there, if it says, hey, you know what, because of that, we need to tweak something, we can still do that, but we should like get the starting point out. I would ask you, I'm more than willing to let you take a stab at it, but if you wanted to sit down with, you know, a board member or two to hash it out together, then
Sure.
I'll make that offer. If you want to do that, I know sometimes it's easier just to have one person come up with a starting point and then let everybody else pick it apart, right, and put it back together. But that's the offer's out there, so you think about that, right? If you're kind of
Okay.
at a wall as you're doing it,
Yeah.
you can ask for some help.
Well, and when we do our one-to-one check-ins, that might be a good time too. Like if I get something down on paper, then to show it to you guys in a one-on-one check-in and let you individually react to it. And then by the time we've met as a group, everybody's kind of seen it once, and then we've accounted for that too. So, and then since you're president, Sean, I might bug you more often about it, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
I'm looking again at the list of action steps that are here. And I, personally, I would benefit by having those action steps included in a document like this, for one thing that helps me clarify what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. And
For sure.
No, I think that would be the cool part of this document too, if it could kind of be interactive, Charlie. So there'd be a lot of lift-off points to that to say, okay, if you wanted to dig into, you know, if goal one's equity, then I can click on our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. I can see the whole plan, and then I can see on the action steps that we're committed to this year or something too. So it makes it a little bit interactive that way. So like you said, you can kind of get a quick check on what's the district working on right now in those areas. All right. So maybe the last part with the goal piece, just before I kind of wrap up with that retreat conversation, get your reaction to that, would be these equity action steps. So I listed out the 5 that we committed to last year. And so this is like sub-goal work, right? These are the goals within the goal. And we had committed to those. And then I put back in our admin recommendations from the summer of 2020. If you click on equity action steps, that's where that page will go. It was back to that 2nd July meeting of 2020 where we developed that list of them, and then tried to do my best to kind of give you an update on what I thought our equity action steps for this year were, but in some way wanted to make sure we were tight with that and that you guys thought that was a good direction to go. And so maybe if I start a little backwards, our PD focus this year, you know, last year was more specific around culture responsive teaching, and we still have that going on. But the whole district PD really is now around that SEL focus. I mean, you could talk about restorative practices within there, but it's a little bit more comprehensive when we look at the general idea of SEL, social emotional learning PD. We're still working on standard development for teaching staff and for other staff. We got the leadership standard in there, as we're going to talk about in a minute. It's really encompassed in these 10 that our leaders have to use or will be evaluated by. Like I said, I'm working backwards here. PBS and Rethinking Discipline, that committee, we're really in the implementation phase of that work. So last year was a lot of recommendations from that big committee that Amy facilitated, and so now this year it's more in the implementation phase of that. Same thing with social studies curriculum and ombuds. And you guys, I know, have had an individual chance to probably check in with Janet by this point, each of you. So then the new one I'd suggest us taking on that seemed to have a lot of conversation, and I think is something we worked on for a few years in the district, but is going to take some continual refinement, is that referral process to Tate. And you know, we got some feedback on that originally about who gets referred to Tate, how does that happen, you know, from our 3 comprehensive high schools. And so that would be maybe the new one I would suggest for this year, as you know, we can't just put 5 new ones on there, as we're actually trying to now implement some of those suggested changes from last year. But I do think we should continue to push forward and have some new piece going on. And so I see that as the SELPD with the learning that's continuing, and then probably that Tate referral process, and that we would, again, kind of monthly update you on what that looks like, maybe what current lay of the land is, what the team's trying to work on. But if you guys felt differently around what you saw on that list, or if you don't think this goes far enough, I wanted to get your feedback on that today before we just start providing updates. And you guys are like, why are you updating me on this? We didn't talk about it. So,
Just curious, would the secondary transfer policy also fall under equity, or do we think that's something different, or I don't know?
I think that's probably, I mean, to me, Ruthie, I think that's just probably one we just need to talk about different. I don't
Okay,
think it's probably
that's fair.
I mean, it's got equity implications, but I think that's just a conversation we're going to need to come back to, I think,
Okay.
in general.
You're gonna hear me on Tuesday night when we do agenda setting, but that's the thing I wanna get on the future agenda, so.
Okay.
We need to talk about that one, yeah.
Spoiler.
Yeah.
I absolutely think the Tate referral process is a good thing to throw on there. I was kind of looking through, you know, the recommendations that you attached there. One of the ones I think, and it's huge, is looking at the rest of the curriculum, you know, the full curriculum audit, not just social studies, just for materials and just how we teach, right? I think that's something that's gonna have a huge impact, but it's a very big thing to just slap on there with the rest of it. But that would be, I think, maybe my next thing to try and tackle, and if it's not this year, if we've made progress on the current ones and move on.
So I'm just wondering, Sean, as I just sitting here, the curriculum review has a process that takes place.
Each individual curriculum unit has their own review. I think that they each have like an equity lens piece to it as they're all doing it. I don't know that they're all doing it to the same degree, right?
But maybe that's what we could talk about, is what is maybe instead of worrying about going to science, English, math, all those different specific areas,
How do we help them?
how do we look at the process and make sure we have a sufficient lens built into the process?
Which I think is a great way to ensure long-term success. My concern about that is it's like a 9-year cycle or 7-year cycle before you get back to something. So that's a little scary if we're not hitting math until 2030.
Yeah.
But remember, it's a 9-year cycle, but something's happening in each of those years,
It
right?
is.
So if you take a look at the process and say, do we have sufficient equity checks in the process? Then wherever they're at in that stage of the process, they could be building in that check. You're right, it's going to be long. I mean, like, we can't do them all at once, but if we don't put it in the process, we won't ever get there. And and maybe there are some things we identify, hey, we need to speed up because it's problematic enough or something to that effect. But that would be maybe a potential benefit, Sean, is that if you looked at the process and put the lens in each place, well then each year, whatever step they are in that process, it would get better as they go along.
I go back to the culture of right? I think we do both, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the long-term systematic way where we're putting those steps into the whole process, but also we react in the moment. If something needs to be addressed much sooner, we just do it, right?
Yeah.
And what would be the trigger then for responding to an equity situation in the current curriculum in the area? How would that?
Well, like we've had circumstances where we identified a problematic part of the curriculum, Charlie just had to pull it out and do something right now,
Yeah, it was
right?
done internally with the
Yeah.
current teachers and so forth.
Yeah, the staff would identify that, or maybe it comes out of a parent concern or a staff concern, and then the teams pull together to review that and replace. Because the 9-year cycle of it, or if it was 7 at one time and now got to 9 because of budget, is really just when the new materials are purchased. And so there's still review of curriculum and implementation of curriculum that goes on within that cycle throughout.
I think it will come out if we have a well thought out strategic plan with, action steps for everyone and, metrics that we're trying to meet. If we find one that we're not meeting and we figure out the cause of that is because of a curriculum issue, right? Well, there you go. That's something we address.
Right, then we'll be on that one right now, right? Because we'll say, okay, we need to do something there now, and we probably need to get out of sequence to address that problem because it's preventing us from being able to achieve a strategic plan goal.
So yeah, then I guess, that's going back to what I was saying, is adding in whatever steps we need to help the curriculum review process ongoing, I think is the target then, as you had it there.
So is number 4 in this list still relevant in social studies curriculum implementation?
Well, I just thought it was important just from like a awareness piece, right? That it's not like we did it one year and it's done, right? It was like it reviewed and now they're going to the implementation step of it. So I just put it on there more for,
Okay.
if we do those report outs again, Brady can provide a short update around, hey, here's where we're at with social studies, implementation this year of the work we did last year, so.
And I think that's a really key, frankly, social studies and math this year too, because we made some big changes.
Yep.
But with social studies, remember, we spent how much money on this program, right? Which, to me, probably, rather than buying a new, I don't even know if textbooks make a whole lot of sense anymore. And having the same textbook for 20 years, things change so fast that it seems like we might be going to these more online modules where you're paying a subscription and it's constantly updating, and then our job is to make sure, one, we fund it and we support it. Then I think we have to take a hard, honest look at the cost payoff on that, right? Like we're paying $1.8 million, is that not too far off, for this inquiry-based social studies curriculum, and then, okay, is that, does that over 20 years, does that, because, the textbook thing, it always, well, let's bump that off. Oh, let's wait, because you're running up to budget stuff, and I don't know that that's going to change. And then that's the easiest thing to say, well, yeah, we're going to wait on textbook if it means, if we don't wait on textbook, we have to fire a teacher. Like, we're always going to choose staff over textbooks. But then we're also dealing with outdated curriculum of that.
Yep.
And then I don't know, like when I was in the district and we had a special ed curriculum review, and special ed obviously is like the biggest department in the district. And there was no input, and then we just got handed this reading, and I'm a behavior teacher, I'm like, this is it, we just get a reading thing, and we didn't even weigh in. It's like, well, we piloted this with like 3 people. I'm like, well, okay. And it felt rushed. It felt like, oh, we, just all of a sudden now we have to do a curriculum review, and it didn't feel like it was an ongoing process with steps along the way, certainly with an equity lens and all those things, that I would hope we can avoid the reactive stuff to be like, oh my gosh, this 5th grade social studies book is terrible, that we can be proactive and say, all along the way, we're really looking at this stuff with the equity lens, so we proactively choose stuff that's really relevant and speaks to all of our kids and culturally responsive and all that.
And that'd be the good thing about putting it on this list, right? I mean, we could actually dig into what happens each of those years, and we could get a little bit of feedback from you guys or from staff as we're reporting out on this one to say, well, you guys, think this is happening, but this is what's really happening in the process, so I think it could probably help us improve that overall process, like you're saying, JP, so that we don't end up with the end result of now we have a curriculum resource that's like, how did we get here, right? I mean, this is the best we landed on, at that point. So that would be a benefit of having that one included for sure.
curious. So although we just put in, curriculum, what was it? I can't see.
The curriculum review process,
Yes,
Jeremy?
so-
Yeah.
I understand all the work that has gone into the social studies curriculum implementation and all that, but why can't that be under that?
The social studies one?
Yes.
It
Why
could-
is it on its own? And
Why is social studies on its own?
Yes.
So social studies was identified on its own last year, I think because of it being a content area that was easily identifiable as maybe not very representative of all of our students, right? So when we were having that a lot of social justice feedback in the summer of 2020, there was pressure for an African American studies course or doing something different with our curriculum, some feedback that our curriculum wasn't representative of our students. And so that was one where we went to social studies to say, okay, well, let's take a good hard look at social studies in particular, because that's probably the one that is most easily identifiable as being problematic. So that was done in isolation with that content area to move it up in the cycle, to take it earlier, because it was identified as problematic. And now I think what we're saying is, instead of just picking and choosing each content area, let's look at the overall process to make sure we end up with better results in each of those areas. Does that make sense?
No.
No?
I understand the attention that is being given to it, but equally there should be attention given to all the others.
Exactly.
So that's why it should be captured under a broader curriculum review process instead of on its own. So that, we can go into details with the social studies under the broader one, right?
Yep.
That's why I feel like it shouldn't be on its own.
Yeah. And I think if we can maybe go back and do it again, I'm not sure that probably would have met expectations we were getting from some of those groups at the time to not deal with social studies. But I do think if you're, again, talking about, okay, what's the system's job to try and improve this, we have to look at our whole overall process about how we get to certain places in curriculum. So I think your point's relevant there, that it's like, yeah, we just have to look at our curriculum review process in general, because it could be social studies today, but it could be language arts tomorrow, right, that we're finding problems with. So if we don't work on the whole process, we're going to end up in problematic areas in whichever area.
Is that not what we're trying to do now?
Is that what we're trying to do now?
Is that not what we're trying to do now? To make sure that
We don't have fires that jump up that we're scrambling to address.
from different
Yeah.
angles.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's what this
that's
item
what
would
we-
be. Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons why social studies is listed out separately, because it falls under those equity action steps that specifically was raised, like in 2020. Because those were like specific issues that we heard from our students, we heard from some of our teachers, we heard from families, and just laying out, well, these are the action steps that we're still taking to address that. But you're right, we have to have that encompassing curriculum review so we're not caught in that same position.
Yeah.
So eventually, somewhere along the line, we'll get there, where social studies is not going to be on its own as indicated.
It's in a different place now
Yes.
because
Yeah.
work was already done for
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Got it.
And I was gonna say, I would want it carved out still, like, I understand that we're teaching stamped this year, and I think that we as a board need to be ready for that.
Teaching what?
I
Stamped.
thought we weren't teaching it. That we can save that for a different
Yes,
discussion.
I've just heard that it's getting taught.
Okay.
Not yet, but like, it will be taught this year. I'm
We
sorry.
can, and
but-
I know that doesn't necessarily fit, to keep us being as honest about our agenda. I know that's not part of the agenda technically, but
My point is,
Yes.
social studies is going to be a
Yes.
hot button
Yes.
this year.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that it needs to be on our radar as a separate pull apart, because I think we're going to hear a lot of things moving forward.
Yeah, because it gets linked into the whole 802 conversation.
And I was
we've
gonna
had
say
and
that
Things
too.
like that. And so I do
Yeah.
think continuing to give an update around where social studies at is a good one, because like Lisa said, if we get a curriculum resource that's used in a class and that people either find it problematic, or if we think it could be, potentially on the line with what some of that legislation is, we probably need to be aware of what's going on there and making sure that we're updating out, around that component as well.
I think,
I'm a big proponent of the plan, do, check, act cycle of change, right? And it's just, it happens to be social studies is we're doing and checking, right? To make sure that it's working or having the appropriate thing. everything else is back at plan. Right, so they're just in a different place on the cycle, so I think that's why it still needs to be separate now until we get everybody kind of caught up, and then they're all
Yep.
going through that cycle together.
And I think 802 affects all teachers, but I think it's really going to affect some of the social
Yeah.
studies
Yeah.
teachers.
That's where it's just most likely to come up.
And we did promise to do, like you said, the additional work as we diving into the implications of 802, of having those conversations and work sessions with, students as well as staff, how the implications for that new law and what they're doing in classrooms. So, yeah, you're right. That curriculum will be a very hot topic.
I understand that.
Okay.
Got it. Sorry, I wasn't being clear. So I think what we have here, guys, is we'll continue to update on the items from last year. And then we'll also add in a new, step in our work as far as around the TAPE referral process, which I think that work's not going to necessarily be new to us, but I think continuing to refine and revise it. And there will be some new pieces that come from it, honestly, as we dig into that some more. But it would be good for you guys to hear a current status, and then for us to talk about, what positive changes we think we can make to that process, or feedback you guys might have around that. And then the curriculum review process, making sure we build a sufficient equity lens into that cycle that's happening on a step basis. And then we'll continue to provide updates in these other areas, just like we talked about, because of the relevance and timeliness of them. All right, so kind of the last part on this item was just this idea of additional retreats, and I'm not sure if you guys are going to say, it works to do it in additional retreats or not, but once we have, and I think the timing of this one is important too. I don't think we should just rush into something like this with our elementary or secondary teams, but once we have a well-crafted strategic plan that I think meets the needs that we've talked about here this morning, what I would really like to do is to have our elementary buildings and our secondary building teams be able to come in and tell their work to accomplish those goals on the site level, right? Because I think that's where we hear, what are the opportunities and what are the challenges in trying to accomplish those goals, and what are the success stories that then we can learn from to also try to use, on some of our other campuses potentially. So they play, they're the ones in the implementation phase around the CSIP, around the equity plan, around those different things. We help lead that work, but as they're trying to go out and do that, I just think that would be a great opportunity for a couple different, reasons. I think one, it gives them a chance to tell their story again about successes and opportunities, and then I also think it's just an important accountability structure for us to build in about being accountable to the work, right? That this is the work we're doing, this is what we're committed to, here's our checks on how it's going, right? And hearing that true, honest feedback. And it's not, going to be realistic for you guys to get to all of the buildings and be able to hear that story, other than when problems come. A lot of times, that people reach out, but to be able to have the building teams talk about this is what it looks like when we're trying to do this work. So that would be just an interest or a goal area of mine, is to try to facilitate a couple more retreats where maybe we have like an elementary focus day and a secondary focus day, and we really organize the morning or the afternoon, however it would shake out, around their work in trying to achieve these big goals we set as a district.
So would you bring in like a building and have them, or?
I think, honestly, what I would really like to do is have each of the building teams come in
Yeah.
in some way. Now, that'd be challenging in our elementary system a little bit with that many buildings to do that, so I need to think through how I'd organize that for you guys before, but I'd really love to have an Alexander, a Borlaug, a Weber, them all come in and really just give you, we'd create a little template for them, here's the things we want you to share out on, here's maybe the time and space you'll have for a few questions, or maybe they each do their presentation and then there's a Q&A afterwards, where they, some of the leadership sticks around and can respond to your questions and things like that. But that would be the idea.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. As part of stuff that I'm doing usually on Saturday mornings, I'll just say that, I've heard from at least 4 building principals who are asking when will we have that opportunity to come in, because they know with our education committee, that's what we used to do, and especially a secondary principal, and I'll just say Tate, talked to her about it, she's emailed about it. I mean, they're wanting to share out some of the things, and I think especially if they have that template and give that opportunity, because great things are happening in all our buildings, and we want to be able to give them that opportunity. And it's not realistic. I mean, I know just for me personally, although I'm told I'm not considered a visitor, I still see myself as a visitor inside the building because education isn't my business. So because of the restrictions we have on visitors, I don't go out as much as I typically would. So I think that would give them a great opportunity to come in to a dedicated time to talk with us.
You know, I agree, I'm just thinking logistically, because we did that with Ed Committee, but we frame it differently, right? It'd be, so when we did Tate, it was mental health, you know, it was just like, what do we?
It's like a highlight program.
Yeah.
when we do
Yeah, it was a
it,
program,
right?
and let's
Yeah.
see what we're doing at Tate for that, and it gave them a chance to tell that story, or we went to Southeast to talk about the castle program that they were doing.
And I think that's why it's important for Matt to
Still
start
coming.
creating outline. Yeah. Oh,
Right,
sorry.
like, we're gonna bring
Yeah.
back equity
Well, I'm
and
just
be able to
wondering
do
how-
some of that. I think Matt's approach for these things are more broader based, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's, again, I think we're gonna do both. of
And
those.
both, so my question is then, how many Saturday, I mean, like every Saturday for the next 4 years, you know, like,
Yes.
logistically, how are we
And
gonna
it's too
squeeze
late
in?
for you to take your name
Yeah.
off the ballot.
But not just, I mean, but we also have to be creative. Maybe it's not just Saturday. Maybe it's commitment from the board of meeting that, hour before a regularly scheduled meeting.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, we do have that hour now since we start at 5,
Sure.
and if we're very targeted in especially when it's not like something heavy that creates a lot of debate, we might be able to get 1 or 2 or 3 buildings to present in an hour. And
Yeah.
they're not having to stick around until 7 o'clock at night until we're finished at the board table. They're fresh, we're fresh, and I'm not feeling bad that they have to leave at 10 o'clock and turn around and be back at their buildings at 6.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it would be, when you think about our elementary campuses, right? A lot of them are going to have a lot of the same systems and structures in place. And so really, I think the best way to think about it would be, for this year, could we really do an elementary morning and a secondary morning? The elementary comes in, maybe we have 3 or 4 buildings that kind of highlight the different components that are in place at the elementary, but every team is represented in some basis. And then we get to the point where we start rotating through who gets to do kind of the talk part of it. That would be one way to look at it. We could rush them all through, do something really short. We could have 2 elementary days, break them into half, and then maybe, so then maybe there's 2 elementary days and a secondary day. I think there's some ways we could organize it, though, to give them a chance to give a little bit in depth of here's what it looks like in an elementary building, here's our story at, Lemmy Elementary, and here's the things we do. And maybe that doesn't happen the same for everybody this first year, but the next year we come back and get the other half of them or something. So if you guys are open to the concept, again, I could kind of bring back like a model about what we could do with that and then give an opportunity to do that. Because I think, like Sean is saying, this is an opportunity to say, what's the system at work, right? Sorry, am I talking with my hands too
No,
much?
no, you're fine. I
I'll make
totally
it far
agree.
Yeah.
I think that it shows for the building teams, it will show a sense of ownership and accountability. And so it's just a shame that I won't be here because unfortunately the pandemic happened and I would have loved to go into the buildings to, meet people and see people, but that didn't happen. And this is going to happen without me. And that's so not right, but it's okay.
You're welcome to come back anytime.
Yeah.
So you can come back, Droney, for any of these.
With the baby.
And in a couple of years, who knows?
Yeah.
Oh,
But I think it is an and thing, like JP said. Like, I think we still, or that Sean and JP with that exchange is, we want to give you, like, here's the system at play a little bit, right? Here's all of the things we're trying to do to achieve at a building. But Ed Committee, we're still going to, like, highlight new or different programming efforts that we've taken. Like, I think that is like more of like a highlight, conversation and something different that's maybe outstanding at that campus, where this is more like, here's our commitment to the goal work that you set forward in the strategic plan. Here's how that looks on our daily, campus.
so I love the idea. Schedule it. I will be there. I wonder if you would maybe want to reach out to the elementary building teams and see how many of them want to participate. I'm just thinking, maybe we only get 4 or 5 that want to come.
Well, I probably won't give them a choice.
Well,
so.
okay, well. But here's, it's going to be more helpful for me. Like, I'm happy to sit through, and I don't want to be like too cynical, but like, rah, 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 our school is great. Like, Penn just had beach day as a PBIS reward day on Friday. We had beach day, and here's kids reading on their towels and if that's what they want to do, that's fine. I am more interested in hearing about programs that are really addressing some of these critical
Yeah, and that's what we're
issues,
talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
right?
talking about.
And
Yep.
so like, I think we all went to the Nest, or almost all of us went to the Nest, like,
Right.
that's fabulous. Like, that to me, I would love to, so, you know, come in and be like, at City, we had some SEL mental health struggles with our students, and we created the Nest to address those, and this is how it works. So that type of presentation, here's what we've identified as our shortfalls, and here's what we're doing that's creative and innovative to fix those, to address those problems.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I would really like out of the presentation.
I think what it really-
Liberty with the PBIS.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I kind of see it like telling them, like, instead of just putting your CSIP into us, like, tell us your CSIP.
Right.
Like, how does your
Yeah.
CSIP work? Like,
Yeah.
okay, so you put all this stuff on a
Yeah.
page, what does
Real
that
life.
look like, right?
Right.
But not fluff stuff.
Yeah,
No.
Right?
No.
And,
Because
and
even like
Show some
for
data.
Heels, you know, they were just named a blue ribbon school. What are they doing
Yep.
differently to get that? Because it's tied to their CSIP.
yep.
And talk about, you know, we saw our challenges, we addressed them like this,
Yep.
and yes, I
and,
totally
and,
agree.
and what challenges still remain,
Yeah.
and what is your plan to address those? Because I keep going back to our, 60%, 68% of African American kids are not proficient at math when they leave. What are we doing to address this?
Yep.
Because it starts in elementary,
Yep.
right? So,
Yes.
If you lose
So,
them
like,
second,
what's
third
the
grade,
plan?
it's hard to catch them
Right.
back.
That
I mean,
is-
my daughter living proof of that, it was fourth grade, and by the time she got to junior high, they were explaining that, oh no, she'll never get caught up, she has to go on the
Yep.
secondary track, and it's like, what are you talking about? That's not,
Yeah.
but the right people were then at the table to say, yeah, no, I mean, we're gonna work with the parents and the teachers, and I keep looking at Matt because that was his first year there, and I'm in his office, like, no, we have to think outside the box. Where can we get her back on track? And we have to talk about those things that
tough
they
stuff.
do.
so I just don't want it to be a fluff.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
all walk away being like, oh, we're doing so great, because we have problems in this
Right.
district that we need to address. And I want to know how we're addressing them, because I suspect that they are.
Yeah,
I
and that's
suspect
the
that
thing,
this
sure.
work
And
is
so-
getting done, and I would like to know
Yeah.
about that.
And I get to work with you guys every day,
Yeah.
right? But they don't, right?
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
only thing I'll say about, and I don't want it to be fluff either, that's not my reason for bringing this, is we do need to just probably be a little bit empathetic and understanding, like, there'll be some nerves around this for buildings, right? That they're not gonna come in and it's gonna be like, now we got you, right? You're doing this
No.
wrong, or you need to do that.
I
So,
mean-
and I'll help send that message, of course, that's part of my job, like, is why we're doing this and what we're gonna do with it, but just having some understanding there for them too, to know, hey, we're just trying to learn what's working, what
Yeah.
you're trying to do, what your opportunities are, where we can try to support you to get better in that lens,
Yeah.
because I know there'd just be a little anxiety, I mean, you know, to come out and talk to the board about what we're doing, or what, you know, what's going well and what's not, so.
And I think even pinpointing them to, you know, an hour and 33 minutes into what our discussion to say, we're not using that as an opportunity to say, I got you, you suck at this,
Yeah.
and downgrade or degrade the work that they've done. We just want to understanding. It's not to attack.
No.
Seriously, that's not our job.
No, but
It's about continuous improvement.
For
I mean, that's the
example-
thing. Yeah.
what I would love to know, like, is if a principal comes in and says, you know what, I saw this program over at X school, I think it would work great at my school, but I can't implement it because I don't have space.
So,
Right? So that's
So
good
they
for us
need-
to know, to be like, okay, space at the school, well, that feeds into our
so they need a-
operations
So
and
they need a
F&P.
resource that they don't have, that
Yeah.
we can provide.
That,
Yeah, so we have ongoing management meetings for whatever topic it is at work, right? And you go into that, you ask the same three questions. You're like, what did you accomplish yesterday or last week or whatever the previous time period is? What are you planning to do in this current time period? And what are your obstacles to doing that? Those three questions, I think, are applicable for just about anything you're doing. And that's our job as a board, right, is to help answer that third one, right? Is what are the obstacles, so how do we get rid of them? And I think
Yeah.
if you phrase it that way to any, you know, school group, right, they're gonna come and be like, oh,
So they're,
well, here's what we have done, and here's what we're gonna do. And
so they're
here's why
gonna
we
come
can't
and
do
talk
this,
to us,
that,
and
and
they're
that.
gonna get something.
Or,
that
well, we
might
can't
be
make that
easier to
promise
do.
that they're gonna
No.
get something.
But
I think
it's
the
really
job for us
important.
will be to listen to themes a little bit, right?
Yes.
Like, what are the themes we're hearing from people, you know, what are the roadblocks that are in their way from, you know, and then we start to make decisions based on those themes we hear, and there, maybe there's a fire somewhere, right, and we know we need to, okay, follow up and address that, but I think the bigger thing is when you hear from the volume of our building is, okay, what are the consistent themes coming back to us that now informs our work, right, that we have to respond to?
I think my guess would be almost every school would want, yeah, there's gonna be nerves, but I think people wanna tell their story.
I think so
Everybody's
too.
doing
That's
their
gonna be the great
And
opportunity.
I would
Yeah.
like to think that the board that they're getting is different than
Yeah.
other times.
Yeah.
That it may have been that atmosphere of, great, they're just calling me in to say I suck at being a building
I
administrator.
mean, if I go back to the ed committee meetings, we did Avid, we did Liberty of PBIS, we did TAPE with their mental health stuff. Southeast, we did Castle. We asked questions and
Yeah.
tough questions at times, but it was also just a learning opportunity. Like, I had no idea, and I know for me, even though everybody wants to tell their story, I appreciate a deeper dive with
Yep.
a particular story because we can get in the weeds a little bit. And I know you kind of have to pick and choose with that, but all of those things, I still greatly informs the work I'm doing on the board because I'm like, here's an example, and that it helps me speak to the public to say, okay, here's the situation, this is what PBS looks like here, and then maybe they'll say, well, at my school, and then that helps me kind of see maybe where some gaps are, and it's, that's probably one of the things I miss the most about COVID, is really getting those
Getting the
stories.
latest, yeah.
Because otherwise, it's kind of what's in your bubble.
Yeah.
You don't get access to.
And I think we're kind of blurring the lines, right?
I was gonna say, maybe that's an okay segue.
And an ed
Yeah.
committee
Yeah.
meeting is, which, it's still on our agenda, so we can talk about all we want, but, because I think we want to
Maybe it's a segue.
bring back.
That's
it
what I
is
was
a
saying,
segue.
yeah.
We want to bring those back, those
Yeah.
monthly meetings, and I think it's important to go to the places. I think there's
Yeah, that was great.
rooms big enough that can accommodate us. At most schools, there are some that are pretty tight places, so we don't be intentional there, but. And I think for those ed committee meetings, like the testimonial, when we had the students talk about after.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
Right,
just,
was much more meaningful
So
than the teachers of Abbott talking
and they
about
were
it.
awesome.
So yes, I think having that opportunity to share that story of the success, right, like that's what those are for.
Yeah, I think those are, and I'll kind of segue us here a little bit, but I appreciated Regina's comment about too, just the culture you guys have created. I started with that today, and I think that's an important one to recognize, and honestly, I probably wouldn't be suggesting if it, as an option if I didn't feel like it would go really well, right? And so I do want you to know I operate with that foundation. It's just also trying to recognize that that's new and different for them, right? That we're asking something new and different. So with that, I think the action step there for me is to kind of identify some dates into the future, start talking to our team about what a template or a format for that might look like, and then, I'll come back to you guys with kind of like, here's what I kind of think the plan will look like to do that, and we'll flesh it out from there.
As you identified things to talk about, I trust your judgment on whether you think that belongs in a retreat format
Right.
or in an education
Yeah.
committee format.
Sure.
Because different things are going to pop up and you'll be like, well, that probably fits
Yeah.
one or the other better, because we're going to need topics for those as well.
Right. And so, yeah, if we transition to that point, these ed committee meetings, you guys have kind of, hit the nail on the head here, that these have kind of been like highlight programs or success stories going on, is really the way we've identified and generated those topics. And I think you've appreciated knowing and seeing those stories and being able to ask those questions. And so, math, I'm not going to call it a success story yet, but it's been a big change for us. And I do think there's successes going on with it. And so I do think that's a good one for us to start with. JP had brought that up in agenda setting at the last meeting. Traditionally, the superintendent's worked with the association, kind of identify these topics, is my understanding. So unless there's other ones you guys say that, hey, this is one we know we want to visit, I would probably work to develop a list with Brady and then kind of bring that as our suggested monthly meeting, that we would go to that site at that time, and then we would hear about that topic and give you guys a chance to ask questions about it. But of course, if you guys have things you want to hear from, then we'll work that into the list. So.
I want to say a couple of things. One, I think I'd urge the other board members to go ahead and read the Hills application for the award that they just received. Because the application describes in very professional detail what is happening at Hills now academically and why it's happening, how they're doing it. One of the best descriptions I've seen so far in my tenure on this board of what I don't understand, which is what actually happens in classrooms.
Great.
So I think frankly, it's a good learning tool for us to take advantage of. The other thing is, while I'm definitely supportive of having teachers and principals come here, I'm also wanting to have more opportunities for doing what Regina, I think, indicated, is going into individual buildings and hopefully into individual classrooms on some basis, not necessarily as a visitor, but as a student who's being taught by the staff there about what's happening to my kids, these kids in this classroom. And well, I can't guarantee I could do that in all 29 buildings before we start this change here. But to me, that's important. I'm becoming more and more cognizant that I'm not a teacher, I'm not an educator, I've never taught, I've never been in the classroom. And what we're trying to do here, it depends upon what is happening in the classroom, something that so far to me is still very much a mystery. So the more I can get exposure to that.
Sure.
So I would suggest just, that to get, I don't know, I agree, that's important as an individual board member to understand sort of the scope of your job, when you sign up, not necessarily as a group activity. And I never conducted that as a group. It's like, honestly, I'm happy to share with you how I went about doing it. And I start with principals and move down to individual teachers in that building. And I mean, I would Uber all over the place since I don't drive to spend time, a whole vacation day in buildings. So I absolutely agree. That helps us understand what it is, our policies that we set, and how it actually impacts the way that they do their jobs. So yeah, I definitely support people doing that.
And you didn't find that teachers, or you found that teachers were happy to have you come in?
Yeah,
see what
I
were
mean,
doing?
they
It's
were
not
always,
interruption, right?
it's never, and it's always, I always work with principals to say,
Oh, yeah.
can you share that with your staff, that I'm willing to spend an hour inside whatever classrooms, I'm gonna be in your building from 8 to 12. Like, I gave them 4 hours, and you do, let's plan it however you wanna plan it. Always started with talking with principals, and then they would take me to 2 or 3 classrooms,
Yep.
and I'm in there sitting like, I don't know what we doing, but okay, I don't know how to do math. Because, I mean, it was like that, because I've sat in algebra classes, and the kids, what you get, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing we'd ask, right, is you just let the
Yeah, but
principal
no,
know.
I'm
and
happy
then-
to share
I'm
that
sorry,
with
what
you.
now?
I was just gonna say, I think Rutina's right. I mean, that's just what we'd ask you to do. Let the principal know you'd like to come visit some classrooms for the day, and I know they'll be more accommodating, and teachers will be more than accommodating to get you into their classroom to do that. So if you just, have the time that's gonna work for you and you wanna handle it that way, they'll sure get you in there and be happy to have you.
And I fully advocate, our retreats can be here, but our ed committee meetings should be at school.
In the
Yep.
space, yeah, that was great.
But Charlie, I'll send you like the emails I use.
Okay.
You guys I need to hit the restroom. Do you mind talking time and date of when you want to do
Yeah,
that?
Well,
I
we
was
should
gonna
take a
make it-
break.
Yeah, we can take 5 for everybody.
Are we allowed to take breaks?
Yes, we usually schedule like a break. I just need to.
I did have a lot of coffee before I got
But
here.
no,
so,
let's just do a break that way you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take 5.
Take 5 seconds.
I'm sorry.
Let's get going again.
So we're around the corner.
I need to go.
Yeah.
So, now going right into the scheduling of our committees.
Yeah.
I would make the suggestion, so, if I was where, mostly I wanted to make Dromy's last night in the board really long, so we put policy and governance ahead of our meeting on Tuesday. Now, my thought was to try and not just take up every Tuesday or other nights, but to try and combine nights that we're already doing stuff. So we put policy and governance ahead of the second board meeting of the month. My suggestion would be, if operations folks thought it would work, is to do the same thing with that one ahead of the second, or the second week of the month, the first board meeting of the month. If they felt like an hour was good enough to do operations. Because then I would prefer to leave Ed committee, like put it on its own night, like the third Tuesday or whatever, because it has the potential to be a longer meeting. And have, you know, a deeper topic there. So that would be my suggestion if folks thought that would work.
I think operations at 5 on the 2nd should be okay. I want to hear from Charlie. Janet's on, and so she'll be, obviously she's not coming back on, so it's Charlie and I, and then whoever joins. But I've got 5 on all of our board nights blocked off anyway, because we were talking about work. So it works for me. It does limit our ability then to throw a work session there or closed session.
So like this Tuesday, right, we're going to have a closed session, but it's going to be after the meeting because we have P&G ahead of
Yeah.
it.
Could we start at 4:30 sometimes if we need?
It makes
could,
it difficult.
but
For
operations,
operations, yes.
for operations. Yeah, that's true. We could always back up earlier if we have a particular, but I don't think we've had many meetings go over an hour. So I think that works.
I just think that would not add a fourth Tuesday for folks that were on operations and want to do it in committee and board meetings. If we did that, right, it'd make it 3 for everyone. But I do think Ed committee should probably be on a standalone night.
Yeah.
Particularly if we're going to go elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to have to
Run
move
back.
places.
Yeah,
Or have a board meeting
there.
at a school.
We have had a closed session before after a committee meeting in some random room in a school before. That has happened. It wasn't great, so I don't know that I want to do it again. But
So time we started those, do you guys remember? Because elementary and secondary were different
I
depending on when
think
we did
we
them.
waited, well, I think it was different depending on if it
Just
was,
trying to capture
We tried to
staff.
match it to their day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we didn't want them hanging around too
Right.
late if it was elementary, because we know they got out at 3.
Yeah.
And so we did try
I think
and
we did it
start
at 4.
early. Yeah, we started at 4.
Did
We do 4 and 4:30?
I think so.
Because secondary, we probably couldn't start right at 4. It would have to be.
Right, secondary, I think we left it at 5.
I'll check with Brady, but we'll just,
Okay.
is it
Yeah,
okay just to
yeah.
schedule the time, whatever time we used before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that worked.
Good there? Am I forgetting any? I don't think so, right?
And just
Yeah.
to refresh my memory, so the full list of band committee assignments we do once
We'll do
the
that
new, at the organization meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
So in theory, the first education meeting would be October 19th. If we can get it up.
we pull it together that fast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But like
yeah,
that in
that's why she
theory.
said.
As soon as possible. if
Yeah.
we
Yep,
can.
the 19th, right? Yep.
Will people be ready?
Okay.
All of a sudden,
Yeah.
That is. Okay.
Fun ones.
So the last thing for today, and I don't think this one's a real long item or a big conversation for today, but more what I wanted to probably introduce to you guys were the new leadership standards, Iowa standards for school leaders. They moved away from the 6 standards that all of us had been familiar with for a long time to 10. And that was part of our update to you guys in those equity action steps, remembering that now there's a standard 3, equity and cultural responsiveness, actually a specific standard in these. And so Sean had kind of highlighted at the beginning there that he was able to learn a little bit about that yesterday, but I put the link in there to you that I believe that one takes you to the SAI site. And from the SAI site there, you can click on some information around tools for implementation, and then you'll see that they actually have a superintendent performance review process or suggested process from them, pulled out a little bit different in there. And so obviously today I don't want to have a bunch of conversation around that in open session, other than probably making sure we're aligned on timeline, for when we might start that process, and then also just if you guys had any questions on the standards, or maybe if Sean wanted to share any of that information he heard yesterday. The key that I understand is really a lot of this talks about, you know, if you were a brand new superintendent, it would be demonstrating proficiency in each of those. And then once you're beyond that first year, it really talks about working through your individual plan, you know, as far as the goals identified. We had a big conversation on goals today. So, you know, honestly, my goals are going to be the district's goals, right? And then how am I living those out in my individual professional development plan through that process? So I think that's what you'll find in a lot of the reading if you look through what it talks about there for tools for implementation. And then timing wise, you know, we kind of did that at the turn of the calendar year last year, and I think that was, at least that was my operating, you know, kind of mindset, and I think some initial conversation we had with Sean and Ruthina around that process. That would probably, it'll be kind of quick for the new board members that come onto the team, but at the same time, probably a good chance to have that conversation about how it looks and works. So that's my opening to this item.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit more. So one of the things that they brought, there's a whole lot of stuff. Go to the ISB website. They have their toolkit and superintendent evaluations on there, and they have a whole bunch of links to different things. And they have like a 40-page document that runs through suggestion timelines and things like that. But there's also a thing that's called, I don't know what it's actually labeled on there, but it's like the streamline form. And what they suggest is that you have that at least, you know, one mid-year sort of check-in. You have your summary evaluation at the end of the year, but they suggest you have at least one mid-year, if not, you know, quarterly check-ins. And they have a very streamlined document that's very simple, and then it lists the 10 standards, and it's a checkbox, meets or doesn't meet, right? And then obviously there's a place there to put in comments, right? So I think that's the kind of thing that we'll want to do, you know, at the turn of the calendar year, is just to check in on those 10 standards. And I can either send you guys the links to the forms themselves. I tried to download it. Some of them were in Google Docs and some were in random Word docs, so their formatting's all checked out. But I think that's a quick thing to do. The other exercise that they suggested the board do, this could be done in a board meeting, is that, you know, when we have the goals, whether it's Matt's goals or the district's, whatever they are, is go through this exercise of, take goal number 1 is ... We look at those 10 standards and say, which standards best fit that goal, and then how do we account for it, right? Are we meeting those standards by meeting that goal, or are we not, right? And so one goal might hit 1, 5, and 7 on the standards list, and a different goal might hit 2, 4, and 5, right? Like, I think that would be a good thing for us to try and do once we kind of work through our strategic plan and have the action steps. We can call them goals or action steps or whatever we want, but then we can tie those back directly to the standards. Then I think it makes the evaluation part easier, because we know what actions we're evaluating the standards against. And we can
Right, that was a little better summary than I gave around so the 10, it's kind of like, that's why I said the first year versus ongoing years, it's kind of like Sean said, the checkbox piece, or you find terminology in there about operating around the assumption that those standards are being met, but then what, the evaluative conversation is around those goals that are outlined. Every administrator has a professional development plan, and that's kind of what drives our evaluation cycle, right? So for you guys, my plan would be to you, and then like Sean's saying, you link that to one of the 10 standards or multiple standards of the 10 through those different goal areas in there, and then that's kind of our evaluative conversation. Sorry, cut you off.
No, you're fine. The other piece was, they told you to, as a board, discuss and land on what your tool is going to be to do an evaluation, right? And we, in the past, had done like that 360 sort of, where we had, I think at the time we only had like 7, I think, standards, right? And we gave everybody like a 1 through 5 sort of number, right? We sent that out to the board members, and then I think folks here, maybe principals, things like that. That was a tool. We could still do that, but we would have to recreate it with the 10 standards, or we can use the very simple check box thing. I don't know that I'd want to send that out to a large group, I don't think that would give you a whole lot of information. They do have a much longer form with a lot of different things you could use, but I think we'd want to land on something. And the mid-year review could just be us, like looking at the standards. And
I like having, not reinventing the wheel and having this simple tool. I also like getting that feedback from a bunch of stakeholders. Yeah, and so, we can, that could inform this, right? That could be how we learn if the standards are being met, is the feedback we get from, because that was really helpful.
I too, I love the 360. It's super helpful. And I wouldn't want to not do it at mid-year either, because the point of mid-year, right, is if there are problems,
Right.
we have an opportunity mid-year to address them and get back on track before the final eval. And I wouldn't want us to miss things because we didn't do the 360.
Right.
I mean, we have an impression, we work with Matt, but it's just that feedback of people in different positions that haven't, it was invaluable. So I don't know if, do we have to do all 10 on a 360? Could we pull out some of the 10 that are more appropriate for the people that work under Matt?
I don't know where you draw the line on that.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, looking at, I'd have to think, I believe the way the survey that went out was like, here's standard 1, and here's a few questions,
Yeah.
for each standard, and you gave it a 1 through 5.
And then you could offer pretext comments.
Yeah, and so good and bad, the strengths and weaknesses on that goal. So I think we got that from some other place, right?
Did Kristen do it in a Qualtrics?
Something.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
she,
Yes.
yeah.
So the way to do it more in depth, if you're following that model that I was trying to talk to you about, you could, I'll be fine with whatever, but you could certainly do it around all 10. I think the idea of what they're showing you in this model, instead of doing it comprehensive of each of the 10 every time, would be if I had 3 goals written in this plan and they were linked to goals, say 3, 5, 7, and 10, then you would maybe do more in depth on 3, 5, 7, and 10 than you would on the other standards, right? And I think that's what they're talking about, and about how you maintain that, how you dive in deeper on those, or if you guys would identify a problem standard for a superintendent, then obviously you would go more in depth on asking questions around that one, but most likely that would be written into one of their goals then too, right? So.
Yeah, I think that there was a conversation from I don't remember where it was from, a board president in another district, talked about that, how when they hired their superintendent, they hired him for specific strengths that superintendent had, which was not filling all 10 of these standards, right? Like it was, however many it was, right? And then the expectation was the team that's built around them that is doing the work, all of those gaps are getting filled by someone, right? So I think that's why you're not expected to be the expert in everything, right? Because nobody can be that. But knowing if there is a gap, how are we filling that gap? Is it by another person, or is it by process, or by board work, or whatever it is?
And to me, I would just consider that. So if it's operations and management, standard 9, I would assume Matt hires people who know how to do that really well. If it's not your, wheelhouse, but you've definitely got people who it is their wheelhouse, so operation management is happening.
So if you do want to just check out this site for frame of reference, it's just new standards for Iowa School Leader site. There's a link off of the SAI page here, and then it takes you to this. And if you click on tools for implementation, that then shows you superintendent performance review.
Yeah.
And it's basically this big packet I've printed out over there, right, that kind of takes you through what those standards mean. And then when I keep referencing this admin
Yes,
professional development
that's
plan, that's
fine.
page 33.
That's
So just, there's a few more clicks there than I thought there were on the Google Doc link, so I wanted you to understand how to navigate that if you want to. So
Yeah, that's.
That links to the same exact, the long form thing that is on ISB.
that ISB does. It's just a different route to get there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's robust.
So I think the goal, at least for me putting it on the agenda today with the retreat, was introduction to the 10 standards, and then just kind of knowing timing wise how you guys saw sequencing through that. And it sounds like a mid-year and then doing a post instead of just the one in the middle of the year. We'll kind of do a mid-year and then something at the end of the year from a comprehensive fashion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think we do the mid-year to help drive the work for the rest of the year. And then, in the spring that's the actual summary evaluation.
Rather hitting the road.
And the one thing I'll ask is that we try to do that before we get to May with the folks, before I'm asking them to do my 360 in May when it's the end of the school year. So
And
if that's okay for a timeline for us to agree to. Yeah.
You just don't want a bunch of boxes checked, no feedback.
Yeah. Well,
The 360 could just be done at the mid-year or at the end. It could be just.
That's true, we could
done
do that
one
either time.
We could use the different
Yeah.
Well,
format
yeah,
the
I
other
mean,
time.
here's the thing, if we do a 360 at the mid-year and we don't identify any issues, then I don't think we need to do a huge, robust 360 at the end of the year. And maybe we do more, if there's, if we do all the standards and maybe we get some feedback on standard 7, then the 360 is just standard 7. Or it's pared down, something like that.
Yeah, do we make progress on
Yeah.
issues?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
That sounds good. That's fair.
super.
So, awesome.
That's all I had for you this morning, Sean.
Yeah, I'm remembering just random things that are sort of popping back in my brain as I'm reading through this giant document. One of the things they mentioned was, don't everybody feel like they all have to do it individually. Like, I'm going to sit down with my little checkbox of 10 standards and figure out, okay, do I feel like Matt's meeting all of these, right? There's have your superintendent take the first pass at it. Say, where are we succeeding and where are we not succeeding?
Yeah.
I bring that out to everybody, and then we can agree or disagree or add color to it, right? But not all of us scattering to the wind and.
But didn't we do that though?
Well, we did the 360.
No, but I thought we also mid-reviewed.
I think
with
around
somebody
goals,
else.
right? It carries over into that too, right? As you assess, what goals do you have, and then do we feel like they met? I think that's still the same process.
Yeah.
I think evaluating against the standards is just another way to do that.
Okay.
Right, like I think the idea, what I would have in my head is that so when it comes to like December or whatever, I'd bring you my admin PD plan, and on my admin PD plan out of these 10, I would probably write some goals around some areas where I think, me or the system, right, that we need to, try to get better at, right? Out of these 10, like, hey, where's the special focus area? Whether it's an improvement thing or whether it's just like, this is that important to us because we've got it articulated in our goal plans, but here's where my focus is going to be. And then that would be your guys' chance to say, well, Matt, no, I think you're off on that one. I think we really need you to focus over here, based on either the feedback from the 360 or feedback you guys have for me, but I think that would be then where we get alignment on, am I working on the things that I should be working on, right? From your perspective and from the feedback you've gotten.
Yeah,
So I think that's speaking to your point, I guess, Sean, is what I'm saying is like instead of each of you having to go through all of these 10, it's more like, can we build consensus on where we think we're at and the steps we need to take?
I think it's that marriage between district strategic plan and goals and the standards that you're required to be reviewed against, right? Like how do those things blend?
How they merge,
Right? Because it's not always clear line of sight there, right? Or we would all maybe infer it differently, right? Say, well, I think that kind of meets this standard because of X, and somebody else would take it a completely different way. So I think that's a good way to align them, is having you take that pass at it.
Yeah.
Was there anything else on that piece, Matt, that you wanted to hit?
Nope, that's great. Thank you.
Okay,